Welcome to the third installment of the ecology videos. Tonight we're going to talk about some of the relationships that exist between animals and nature. So the first thing that we want to know is that in nature, a lot of organisms live very close to each other. And close relationships are called symbiosis. And there are species that live close together and both organisms benefit. There are species that live close together where one organism harms the other. And then there are species that live closely together, but they don't really affect each other. A famous example of species that would both be benefited by living closely together would be sea anemones and clownfish. Think about Finding Nemo and that opening scene where Nemo comes out of the sea anemone. When clownfish live in the sea anemone, the clownfish are protected, and they also leave a residue on the sea anemone that makes the sea anemone not want to be eaten. And that's an example of something called mutualism, where both organisms benefit from the relationship. Another type of relationship is called parasitism. So here we have, guess what that is? That is lice on human hair, and lice would be an example of a parasite. In parasitism, one organism benefits at the expense of the other. So our lice over here is very happy. He has a nice home. He has food in the form of our skin flakes. And he's living his life. He's very happy. But his benefit comes at our expense. He harms his host. So in a parasite-host relationship, the parasite benefits while the host is harmed. Another example could be the flu virus. The flu virus is a parasite that lives in humans. It benefits by getting nutrients and living space from the human, while at the same time harming the human. And the two examples I gave you were in humans, but this happens all over nature as well. So here we have a question, we'll do it together. A certain fungus can be harmful when it infects the outermost layers of the human foot, while another type of fungus can be beneficial when it recycles nutrients by breaking down dead organisms. Which terms identify these two roles of fungi? So our first fungus is harmful. It benefits by harming us. So that we would call a parasite, which leads us to choice number 3. But if we read about the second type of fungus, it says it breaks down dead organisms. We should know right away that's the definition of a decomposer. So the answer to this question would be choice 3. Another thing that we want to know about the relationships that exist in nature is to understand what a habitat is and what a niche is. So I hope that you all know what a habitat is. A habitat is just the place where an organism lives. A niche, however, would be more about the specific job that an organism has in an ecosystem. So what I wrote here is that organisms have specific roles in their ecosystems. An organism's habitat is the place where it lives. For example, we could say the bird's habitat is a tree. Niche is a little bit more complicated than a habitat. A niche describes the way of life of an organism. So every organism would have a specific niche. We could have 5 different species of birds all sharing the same habitat, but yet they each have a different niche within that habitat. For example, 3 birds might live in the same tree. Bird number 1 lives at the top of the tree and eats ants. Bird number 2 lives in the tree trunk and eats beetles, while bird number 3 lives on the ground underneath the tree and eats worms. So even though these 3 birds occupy basically the same habitat, they also occupy different niches. They live in different areas of the tree and they eat different foods. As a result, the tree can support 3 different species of birds without them competing because they each have a slightly different role. What you want to know from that is that organisms that live in the same habitat but occupy different niches will not compete. And that's something that you kind of want to just commit to memory. If I live in the same habitat as someone else, but I do a different job, I'm not going to compete with that person. Here we have a question related to niches. When 2 different bird species temporarily occupy the same niche, they would most likely, so we have 2 birds and they're in the same niche, So they would most likely change their nesting behaviors. No, because we're saying they live in the same niche. 2, not affect one another. That's also not true. There's clearly going to be competition between them since they're in the same niche. Will they 3, interbreed to form a new species? That is very doubtful. 4, they will compete with each other. Since they're both in the same niche, let's say we have 2 birds both living in the tree trunk, both wanting to eat beetles, obviously they're going to compete with each other.